Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true, you're a pal and a confidant. If you threw a party and invited everyone you knew, you would see the biggest gift would be from me, and the card attached would say, thank you for being a friend.
Hey everybody, today on the podcast we welcome the Rev Dr Amy Butler to Beloved Journal. Amy's recently released book, Beautiful and Terrible Things, speaks to her journey through ministry and life. Dr. Butler is currently serving as the designated pastor of Community Church of Honolulu in Hawaii. She was the 7th senior minister of the Riverside Church in the city of New York, and the first woman to serve in that role. She has held pastorates at Calvary Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and St. Charles Avenue Baptist Church in New Orleans, Louisiana. This was an interesting and compelling interview about our future, about our present, and where we can find God in it all. I hope you find it meaningful. Let's listen in. Amy Butler, thank you so much for coming on Beloved Journal.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So your storied career, I mean, and you really do have quite a journey, has held both promise and challenge. You're in Hawaii now doing some amazing work there. You've been in very different places and varied ministry points. At this point in your ministry, how do you view the larger picture of what all has been accomplished in your life? What are you thinking right now on this big book tour too? I mean, where are you right now?
Well, I'm physically in Georgia right now, and I'm headed to Texas tomorrow. Going around the country talking about the book, but my heart is in Hawaii. I went there in February to help my parents who are aging, and I've really enjoyed coming home, and I'm pastoring a small church there. But my heart is in invested faith, because as I look at the larger landscape of the institution, I see big change on the horizon, and I see that our institutions are not ready for it and even grappling with the reality of it. And so a lot of my effort is poured into building this fund for faith-rooted social entrepreneurs. In the meantime, the book came out, and so going around visiting with people about the book and pastoring a church, as you say, the busy season.
So let's talk about invested faith for a second before we get into the book, because it's something you're doing that's really important. It scares and excites me as someone who really loves, like, I'm such an institutionalist in some ways. I love the idea of a church as a building and a place where I love that part of that really gets me excited. And yet I know that there are churches across our landscape of our country who are having really difficult and harrowing times making difficult decisions. That said, I'm really glad there's someone who is there to work with them through all this like resurrection process. It really is a resurrection process, if I may be so bold as to call it that. Tell us about what invested faith is, what you're doing for someone who might not be aware of it, and how we can see what you're up to there.
Sure. I started Invested Faith, which is a fund that receives the resources of institutions at the end of their life cycle and creates a legacy. And so we give out unrestricted funds to faith-rooted social entrepreneurs who are building businesses that are sort of imagining what the future of beloved community could look like. There's a fine line, Rob, between wanting the work of God to go on in the world and then killing ourselves to preserve an institution that has been for some time an expression of God's work in the world. I always think about, how many committee meetings Jesus went to, not very many. And so he spent a lot of time talking about throwing seeds out in the world and wandering after where God's goodness is coming up. And so I sort of see invested faith as like something to tide us over until we know what the next expression is. And like you, I'm I'm an institutionalist and I love the church and I probably will serve the church until I die. But for like, I think about like my kids, like, how are they going to experience God's goodness in the world? It's not going to be the same way as me, and that's okay. So, how can we make sure in this time of unknowing that all the resources that have been poured into this institution are being stewarded in a way that throws out the seeds of God's goodness? So that's what we do at Invested Faith.
It really is a wonderful organization, and we'll link in our podcast notes to what you're doing there so that people can take a look. Your book that just came out, Beautiful and Terrible Things, it really had quite a profound effect on me after reading it. I kept sitting there thinking, this amazing person is bearing her soul to the world. And when you bear your soul to the world, that is often an intimidating process in some ways. I mean, to write a book is it's an incredible process. And this one, it doesn't shy away from difficult issues that you've faced over a lifetime. You talk from childhood memories all the way to very recent memories. Was it hard for you to trudge up all that stuff that comes along with it? The memories that are good and bad, the memories that you've had over the course of your career. What was that like to go back and think about some of those things that weren't so beautiful and maybe more terrible?
Well, Rob, I don't know how you write at the pace that you do, because writing this book was probably it has been one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But at the end of the day, tell the truth or go home. I mean, I have been on enough paths to know that it's too much trouble for me to try to pretend that I'm something that I'm not. And I don't know about your life. Well, I do know about your life, but I'm sure it's my suspicion that for most of us who are honest, there have been beautiful and terrible parts of being human, like breathtakingly beautiful and really, really terrible. And so, to answer your question, I feel like I'm walking around without my skin on. I feel really exposed and vulnerable. And in order to get this book out on the shelves, I had to have some hard conversations, with my parents, with my sisters. I tell part of their story in the book, and realizing that a lot of the really painful things that happened in my life did not happen just to me. So, like, it's been hard on all the levels,
I want to ask you, and again, it's not been all bad, right? As someone, I've had the opportunity to live life in public ways, like you have, that some of them have been really quite like, oh my God, I feel the voice and heart of God in this moment, and I am so close to what I am supposed to be doing. And then there's moments where I feel like even my closest friends don't know who I am and have deserted me in some ways. Now, there's been wonderful people too who have stuck with me through and through, and I'm grateful for that. But sometimes when it gets really quiet, like in my life at least, I think about how things could have gone differently. And I'm not saying I would have done anything differently, but how things could have gone what have there been anything that I could have done differently in my life to get me to a point where I am or where I might be differently? It's such a futile exercise, but I wonder, do you find yourself doing that with all that's happened? Is there like a moment where you're like, man, I could have done this, or are you kind of like, I did what was right and I did what was best, and that's what I stand by? I mean, where are you at there?
Well, I think if you read the book, you'll see that I try to be as honest as I can about the mistakes I've made along the way. And as any good leader does, I think I've done a lot of like thinking about what are critical leadership mistakes? How can I get better at what I do? And that's been a part of this. But I also have rejected a lot of um, fundamentally theologically toxic sort of ways of looking at my life. Like, I had to go through being sexually abused by an uncle when I was a child so I could get to this point. That's not true. And I don't, I think that God redeems our pain, but God doesn't require our pain. And it's so interesting to me. So many people have read this book and been like, oh my God, you've been through so much pain in your life. And it's the same as you. Like, it's just, you're just more familiar with your own pain. It's just the reality of being human. And so I think it would be foolish not to say, if I could go back, I would do things differently. But here we are. And I think living with integrity into this moment is what I'm called to do right now.
I think one of the amazing things that I've noticed about your ministry, even from my perspective, the first time I met you, you were at Calvary Baptist. You took generous time with me, with as a very young person in ministry. I think I was in high school when we first met. Or no, I was in college. Yeah, I was in graduating high school, going into college. And you've really invested in young people. I mean, you have staked in the same way that some institutions of the church have ran from that. You have kind of said, you know what, we're going to lean into this reality of young people coming up into ministry. Was that because of your experience, of having chances and not having chances? Where did you see the idea that, I mean, and it's such a novel idea, right? Young people should be involved, and yet for some people that's a non-starter. Where did you see your investment in young people come to bear as a pastor and as someone with invested faith in other organizations?
Well, I think, Rob, that is theological, and it comes from my sort of ecclesiology, my idea about the church, which is, I mean, one of the reasons I'm drawn as a leader to a community of faith is because I think I can have the most impact in the world by helping create communities that in turn create more communities that in turn create more communities. And so, fundamentally, I think that's where it comes from. Practically, um, I'm serving at a time in the life of the institution when a lot of our colleagues are graduating from seminary, and some of the most talented ones are not coming to the institution. So when I went to New York, I had a really hard time building a team. And I was looking for like the most talented, the most cutting edge, the most forward thinking innovators. And I had a really hard time finding them. And I think ultimately I'm really proud of the team that we built there, and that may be one of my best contributions to the institution after I'm dead and gone. Some of the amazing people who I served with, Rachel Johnson, Kevin Wright, Christian Peel, leaders of this moment and of our time.
Well, and all those people and countless others that you've served with have just done incredible things and continue to do incredible work alongside you. I'm curious, what was your favorite story to tell in the book? Because your book, as the reader will know, kind of chronicles a journey. If there is such a thing as a favorite part on that journey, what was your favorite one to tell?
So this is an interesting question. I enjoy the most talking about the chapters about my children. And there's specifically a chapter about Hayden and Hannah in there, and Sam is my youngest. And the chapter that I wrote about him got cut by the editor, so he's currently banning the book, but out of protest. No, but I think chapter 6 is among my favorites, called Mom, I'm an Atheist. And it's the story of when Hayden, my oldest, came home from college and informed me that he was an atheist. And it really is exploring my idea of what the church can be and what I hope for my children, as I'm sure you do for yours. Like, we want to give them a community that sustains them in the holy and harrowing task of being human. And for me, that's been the church, and that the church communities that I've been part of have embraced my children on their varying expressions of faith journeys. And so that's a story that I love to tell. I don't want to tell what happens in the end. You can read the chapter, but it's a beautiful story that I can't read out loud without crying.
I
Still.
mean, that story, and I'm not going to ruin it for readers. They should get the book because that story in and of itself is worth reading. because the ending is just, you're sitting there, you're like, this is what can happen when you do the right thing, and you don't force, it's really quite profound and prolific. I love that one too. Let me also ask you, one of the things that I've been having conversations with my own faith community that I attend here in Statesville is like, gosh, we are not what we looked like before the pandemic. We are at a vastly different place than we were. And yet the kind of neutral position, maybe there is the right term, is that at least I have always said, like, I want the church to at least be there for my children. And that kind of is almost that's not guaranteed right now for a lot of institutions, as you know. Maybe what should be our position right now about the future of church for our children and what that might look like? I mean, you're kind of got your finger on the pulse of some of that. What do you see the church looking like when my children, who are in, 5 and 6, are growing up to a point where they're members of a church in full, they're full members. They're leading the church in such a way that is what I've done. So,
Rob, I think for people like you and me, especially people who are institutional in our bones and who find life in institutions, we have to be honest about our grief and about what we're saying goodbye to. And, the truth of the matter is there may not be church as we know it for our children. Even, my children are much older than yours. They find life and God and spirituality and community in like jumping feet first into the work of some of our invested faith fellows, serving on their boards, going to, they don't love organs like we do. Rob, they don't care about stained glass windows. I just have always thought, like, I wanted them to recognize the smell of the fellowship hall as like a, a smell that reminds them of being loved by a community, and the reminder that their work as a human in this world is to create communities where God's love is born. And I don't know, man, it might not be in a cathedral or even in a sanctuary. And that's hard for me to say out loud. It's really hard, but I'll give you an example. My oldest is Hayden is level 3 sommelier, and he directs a wine program at a restaurant. And he said to me, "Mom, you and I do the same work in a way. We create an environment where people can connect with each other. We tell stories, and we bring things into an environment that helps people create meaningful relationship." And I thought, oh, all right, God, do your thing. I mean, I don't know.
I love that. I Amy, as you know, we adopted our 2 daughters, and Phoenix is much more the free spirit. She's the younger one. She's gonna be she very well. I mean, she could be a sommelier. I mean, I could totally see that happening for her. Athena, my oldest daughter, is very much a lot like me, even though we're not biologically related, in the sense that she she's very by the book, institutional. She likes her things where she likes them. She likes the place where they should be. And as I think about your book, as a girl dad, I see you talking about reproductive health care, and I believe my girls should have that when they need it, if they should need it. It is the imperative importance of women in the pulpit and in places of leadership in ministry, and also it is that helpless feeling. Your book is that helpless feeling you get when you see the capability of harm that many men can do, and people who buy into that can do when women sometimes intimidate them or scare them or cause them to pause with what they've always had planned. And as I said, my daughter is 6, and I would never wish this on her, but I could totally see her having some calling to ordained ministry or something like that. What would you say to a young girl who is growing up, who may feel God's call on their life to some form of leadership in the church in this moment, some form of ministry, in later years? What would you say to that young girl who may be in a position that you were in a long time ago feeling that kind of call on your life by God?
Well, I love that you say I wouldn't wish this on her, because I always tell my students, like, don't do this unless you have to. And you and I are the recipients of a really beautiful and terrible vocation. It's like we know what we want to do in the world, and it hurts so bad too. So, good and bad. Um, as a student of history, you will know that as institutions decline, there's room for women to step into leadership. And 20 years ago, someone asked me, if you could do anything for the church moving forward, what would you do? And I said then, give women leaders MBAs, because we're the ones who are going to be taking this institution and what remains of it into whatever God's goodness is next in the world. So um, I would say, I mean, like, if you have a vocation, what a gift, you know what you're supposed to do in the world. And I would say, gird your loins and be ready, because it's going to be really, really hard. Yeah.
You've been a trailblazer though. And the other thing I think about you that I've really admiring your career from my vantage point, at least, has been you're not afraid to do work. You remind me of we have a mutual friend, Jason Harvey. When he was at Broad Street at my home church, he was not afraid to change the light bulbs or do the things that, people, someone said the other day, he was one of the last pastors we've had at that church who actually did work. And what they meant by that was like, do the work that others were not willing to do. And in some ways, in your own unique way, you've done work that people are not willing to do. Church is going to look a lot like that, right? Like as you said, with the MBA, that's such a profound comment, because people, they don't teach that in seminary. They don't teach you how to, fix a boiler or how to, do all this spreadsheet stuff that we have to do in this moment. Should seminary education reflect that? How can we adjust? Is it too late to not, to adjust? What can we do in this moment to prepare leaders for this coming whatever's next?
Well, it's not just entrepreneurial business skills, right? Because we're being asked to create something new in this moment. It's also the work of helping our people grieve in ways that are productive and not destructive. And I don't know about you, but the education that I got was not sophisticated enough in either of these um, departments to help me learn how to do that, other than making mistakes and trying again and trying again and trying again. The thing I think we have going for us is that the central story of our faith is death and resurrection. And I feel with a full confidence that God is not done with our world yet, and that if we have the courage, we can find resurrection and find God at work. And that's going to take a lot of courage for tomorrow's leaders and for Athena.
Yes. And yet I'm also one of those people who has full faith and confidence that those people who are going to be called in this moment are going to be called by God. And there's some credit in that. There's the full faith and credit of our Creator, and that's some real stuff right there. So Amy, I've been asking these questions, some similar questions of everyone who comes on my podcast, to try to have a blanket question that everyone can answer. And I think the one that I asked last week is actually going to be a repeat offender again, and going to continue throughout the rest of the season of the podcast. But I'm curious, when it's all said and done, when the curtain goes down on your life, Amy Butler, how do you want to be remembered?
They bravely told the truth. That's it. I mean, I don't know any other way to make it through the beautiful and terrible of being human than to be brave and to tell our truth. And I think church is one expression of the ways in which, if we learn to do that, we can change the world.
You will be found, I think, as someone who told the truth. So Amy Butler, thank you so much for coming on Beloved Journal.
Thanks, Rev.
Beloved Journal is a podcast on a mission. Check out our other episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Today's podcast was hosted by the Reverend Rob Lee.
Find him on Twitter @RobLee4 or on Instagram @RevRobLee. You can find our social media on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching for Beloved Journal and finding our logo. Beloved Journal's theme music is a cover of the Golden Girls theme song done by Mipsa. Seriously, they're the best band in the world. This podcast was the dream of Stephanie Lee and was produced by Maggie the Golden Doodle and Frank the Poodle. Go show the world that it's worth fighting for. And as always, thanks for listening.